Hi, I'm Daniel J. Lewis from the AudacityToPodcast.com, here to answer your podcasting questions. I do this live on Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time over at the AudacityToPodcast.com/live. I've got a few answers to share with you. First, I want to talk about a new long-term storage option that I'm going to start recommending and switching to. Daniel Sinclair asked about adding chapters to your files. Philip Dacus has several questions about getting started with a podcast and some specific issues relative to nonprofit. Gordon wants to know about putting in episode numbers in the titles. And Ed has a question about connecting some gear together. The sound device is 633 and a Behringer Q802. So if that interests you, then please stick around for my answers to those questions. And if you have your own podcasting question, if you're watching this live right now, feel free to comment below this video to ask your podcasting question so I can address it here in this recording. Or send your question to feedback@theaudacitytopodcast.com. The more concise your question can be, the better I can be able to read it so that I can queue it up for one of these Q&As that I do on Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern at theaudacitytopodcast.com/live. So starting off, I have shifted my recommendations around for where to have long-term storage of your podcast files. And this is not to serve your files publicly. This is not podcast media hosting or web hosting. This is what you do with your podcast after you've published it. So what do you do with your master files, the images you've created for it, all those sound clips you've collected and everything? I recommend you save all of that. Don't delete that stuff. If nothing else, at least save an uncompressed WAV version of your audio. But it's best if you can save the master version where you could go back in and change the tracks or re-normalize or anything like that. So save everything for your podcast. Put everything that's relative to and relevant to a particular episode within a single folder. And then you can either zip that up or archive it just as it is with the folder and all of its contents. But by having then every episode in its own folder and saving it, you could at any time go back and get a higher quality version, re-encode it. You could do other things with it, all kinds of really cool stuff. And it's really nice to have a long-term copy of your podcast. So I've recommended different services over the years for ways that you could do this long-term storage. For a while, I was using and recommended Amazon Glacier. That's their very painfully slow, but also extremely cheap online storage service. When it first launched, it used this API that very, very few easy-to-use apps integrated with, and that led to very slow adoption. And just the way that the device or that the system works is extremely slowly, but it's for long-term storage kind of stuff. I always felt like when you started uploading a file, what it would have to do is literally make a robot go somewhere in the warehouse, find a hard drive for you, bring that hard drive back, plug it in, and then your file would start uploading. I don't know if that's the way it actually works, but that's the way it felt like it would work, because starting to upload files used to, at least back then, I don't know how it is now, but back then, I think it is still kind of like this now. It's a long, slow process before your files even start uploading. And so I'd uploaded a bunch of stuff there. It was complicated, and especially when I wanted to then download my entire archive to switch it over to something else, that was extremely expensive because of the way that they bill. And it's really confusing, the billing for it and how to use it and stuff. So I stopped recommending Amazon Glacier. Then I went over to MediaFire, and MediaFire provides a service that's kind of like Dropbox, and you pay a certain amount per month or per year, and you can store up to 1 terabyte of files. That could work for long-term storage, but the problem there is you're limited to 1 terabyte, and you can't go anywhere above that. If you buy their special premium plan where you can go above that, it jumps hugely in price for every new terabyte of data you want to store. So not really the best model there. Then I thought I found my hope inside of Amazon Cloud Drive. This is a service that is an additional cost, but for Amazon Prime users, you can use Amazon Cloud Drive to store your photos, an unlimited number of photos included with the cost of your Amazon Prime account. But Amazon Cloud Drive was kind of trying to be a Dropbox replacement as well as online cloud storage for files. This is not Amazon S3 or Amazon CloudFront or anything like that. It wasn't made for public storage of files and public retrieval, but more like personal or private storage and retrieval. And that launched a few years ago, and it had unlimited storage for $60 a year. That was fantastic. I uploaded everything there. I even went through probably 100, no, more than 100. Yeah, a couple hundred DVDRs, CDRs, old archives I had from like my first ever podcast episode, old design projects, old video projects, old photos. I uploaded everything to Amazon Cloud Drive. And now I'm using, I think, about 3 terabytes of space over there. And that's a lot of data. And recently, Amazon announced that they are discontinuing the unlimited option for Amazon Cloud Drive. So if you were like me and you start hosting your files on Amazon Cloud Drive, what they've said that they'll do is you have until your renewal, and you get to keep your plan until your next renewal. When your plan renews, then it switches over to the limited plan. And the limited plans are basically $60 per year per terabyte. And so for me, I would be looking at my costs tripling, literally overnight, tripling to $180 a year for this storage. So I can't really recommend that anymore. And it's really frustrating then that they did this kind of bait and switch, and they may backtrack on this and say, well, okay, we're going to grandfather in everyone else, but they're not so far at least. And I kind of expect that they won't. So what to do then? Well, for me, if I keep my files, all of my 3 terabytes of files in my account, when my account renews in December, I believe, then I'll have to start paying $180 per year. And unless I download everything or get my storage amount below that. But what I'm now thinking is the best option, and it used to not be the cheapest option, but now it does actually seem to be the almost cheapest option, but probably the easiest and probably the best in the long-term expense, is BackBlaze B2. BackBlaze B2 seeks to be a replacement or a better competitor to Amazon S3. Amazon S3 and BackBlaze B2 are both file storage services. They are not cloud storage, CDNs. They are not distributed networks. But they do have the ability for you to upload and keep your files in there for indefinitely. And then you pay based on how much you upload, and you pay also based on how much you download from that potentially, and what kind of download bandwidth that you get. Well, Amazon S3, so don't think of Amazon S3 or BackBlaze B2 as podcast media hosting, because it's not the CDN that you need, the cloud distributed network or content distributed network that you need. But what you could use BackBlaze B2 for is your long-term storage. It costs half a penny per gigabyte per month. No super complicated things like, oh, you get so many polls and puts and status requests, or it costs this much for 1,000 more of these requests or pings or anything like that, or nothing complicated like that. And now with apps like Smart FTP and some other FTP apps starting to support BackBlaze B2, it's pretty easy to upload files to there. And there goes my Siri waking up on me. I need to turn off Hey Siri on my iPad. And although it's half a penny per gigabyte, if you do the quick math, that works out to be about $60 per terabyte per year. So it seems like it's the same cost, except that the way that these terabyte-based services work, like Mediafire, Amazon Cloud Drive, and stuff like that, is you pay for a whole new terabyte of potential storage, regardless of how much you're using that. So if you're paying $60 a year, well, that's $5 a month. And you're paying $5 a month. You start paying that additional $5 a month if you have 1.0000001 terabyte. As soon as you go over 1 terabyte, that's when you have to start paying for 2 terabytes of storage. So you're paying a whole lot for that big chunk, and you might not be in a place where you need to use all of those terabytes for several years. It might take you several years to get up to that point. So that's why I like BackBlaze B2 and why I will be switching all of my own long-term storage over to BackBlaze B2, because you pay based on what you actually use. So if I upload 1.1 terabytes, I will be paying to store 1.1 terabytes and whatever that ends up costing per month. So the half a penny per gigabyte storage there. Then if I upload another 100 gigabytes, I'd be up to 1.2 terabytes. And so I'd be paying that much per month. I wouldn't jump up to paying 2 terabytes per month until I'm actually using that much space. So it's a slow climb up to a higher amount, or up to an amount, instead of this big stair-step tier-based thing where as soon as I cross over 1 terabyte, then I have to start paying for 2 terabytes. So it's paying for only what you actually use instead of for what you have available to you. So that's why I'll be switching to BackBlaze B2 for my long-term storage. And if you're interested, you can sign up. I don't know if I even get paid for this, but I've been using BackBlaze for backing up my PCs for a while. And my affiliate link is theaudacitytopodcast.com/backblaze if you want to sign up over there. I don't know if I get paid anything if you sign up for BackBlaze B2, but still, it'd be cool if you use my affiliate link. And BackBlaze is a great computer backup solution. There are other services out there that you could look at. A concern I have is anything that says unlimited at some point will probably close, or will probably no longer be limited, or unlimited, that is. Don't use your web host. That's probably against the terms of service. There are places like CrashPlan that say they keep a permanent backup of all of your files, but they could change that. And there are other things that could be a concern. Policies that could change. It could be any little switch in their plans could then mean that all of those files you thought CrashPlan was hosting are no longer available. So my basic recommendation is don't try and hack something together when you're needing a lot of storage space. Yes, you'll pay per gigabyte with BackBlaze B2, but you'll pay for only what you use. And it seems like it's probably the best solution for now. Otherwise, you could consider still continuing to burn things to DVD-Rs or buying external hard drives and you archive all of your data to that. And that could be good enough for you. Hard drives could at some point die. So that's why it's a little nicer to rely on a cloud service. So BackBlaze B2. Now I have to go through and download everything from Amazon Cloud Drive and then re-upload it all over again. Ugh. Daniel Sinclair asked, what is your take on the value of chapters? Is there an embedded format that will bring chapters to downloads onto mobile devices? Does only AAC support that? Well, AAC does support that. That's one of the long benefits of AAC. However, AAC is not supported by everything. Despite the rumors to its death, MP3 is not dead. MP3 right now has the absolute widest compatibility. So if you want your podcast to play on anything and everything, MP3 is the way to go. AAC is another licensed format. So while AAC does certainly have benefits, quality levels and other things, and including chapters and stuff you can embed, it's also something that is licensed. Thus, you have to use premium software in order to encode to it. But AAC does support chapters. MP3 can also support chapters as well. You just need the right software to encode that. There are tools out there that will let you put chapters into MP3s. Aphonic can even put in chapters in MP3s, and apps can read that. Like Overcast, for example, does read MP3s with chapters, and you can see then the chapter markers in Overcast. And the podcast app has been able to use chapters with AAC. I'm not sure about MP3, but we're right about to get a new version of the podcast app from Apple. The thing is about these chapter markers, they can kind of hurt some functionality. For example, on some podcast apps, if there are no chapters, like if it's a default podcast file, you press the skip forward button and it skips forward 30 seconds. But if the episode has chapters, you press that button and it jumps all the way to the next chapter, which might not be what you intend your audience to do, or you as a user, that might not be what you want to do. The thing that's a little bit more compatible is if you really want to have different chapters or that kind of chapter-like ability, is put time codes inside of your show notes that appear with your files. This would go inside the blog content of your RSS feed. Those time codes can be read by apps like Overcast will read those. And if you use Simple Podcast Press on your website, it can read those and make it integrate with your show notes that way. And inside of other podcast apps, if they can just see that time code, they can know where to skip to get to that spot that you're talking about, or where you change subjects, or for whatever reason you have that. How much do people actually want the chapters? I don't know. See, the thing about chapters is you're providing the ability for people to skip content to jump to different content. If that's a big demand with your audience, then maybe you need to look at what content you're putting in your episode, and if where you put it is the best place to put it, because it might be better to put it somewhere else so that way your audience doesn't have to skip it all the time. So do you really need chapters? Maybe, maybe not. Now, if it's something like links or images that you could do with an enhanced AAC, I would just say send people to your show notes for those kinds of links and information. Time codes kind of work universally and might soon be read by more apps as well. Philip Dacus said, my main question would be about how to get guests for my show. First, you could go out there. The easy guests to get would be other podcasters. And Philip, I don't know what your podcast is about, but if you can find other podcasters whom you want to have on your show, then they would probably be delighted to be on your show. So you could reach out to them, contact them, find their email address, tweet them, whatever, ask them, hey, could you come on my show to talk about such and such? Or I'd love to ask you some questions about this thing. And show that you know who they are. Don't send a blanket email to them. And any guest you want to have on your show, don't spam them with this, hi, podcaster, you would be a great expert on my show. Say something relevant to invite them and tell them what you hope they could share with your audience. Tell them a little bit more about your audience, and don't make them jump through all kinds of hoops and tough issues like fill out this long form or complicated things in order to be on your podcast. Make it as simple as possible for them. Now, if your guests are not other podcasters, then you need to find the right person to contact. For celebrities, the right person to contact is not the celebrity. It would be their agent. You can get agent contact information through imdb.com, sign up for a paid account over there, and then you can find the contact information for all of those agents. And it's the agents who would say, oh yeah, we want to get more publicity for this actor, so let's get them on this podcast. If it's an author, talk to their publicist or their marketing company. You could still tweet or reach out to some of these people personally if you're able to directly correspond with them, like through Twitter and such. And then they might tell you how to get them invited. The main thing is focus on what value they can bring to your show. Don't think about, oh, I want to have this famous person on my show because they'll make my show grow so great and they'll promote my show and all of this. That's not the reason to have guests. Get guests on your show because of the value the guest brings to your audience, not because of the value they bring to you personally. Next question from Philip is, which equipment to use? Well, the equipment to use really depends on your needs. If you need to mix things together, music, multiple microphones, live streaming, that kind of thing, then you need a mixer. And then you need a microphone for each person. In general, for every participant on your podcast, they should have their own microphone and their own headphones. You don't have to set it up so they're recorded into their own tracks, although that is a possibility, but it costs a lot more to do that kind of thing. You could start out with something as simple as the Audio-Technica ATR 2100 USB and plug some headphones into that. It can be simple earbuds, like I'm wearing the Apple EarPods right now, the wired EarPods, and that can work fine for your guests. It doesn't have to be some fancy studio headphones or anything like that. Next question here from Philip as well is there a company that focuses on serving nonprofits? As a nonprofit, I'm more interested in teaching and helping people than profit, which is what most companies focus on. Of course, if profit comes, so much the better, but that is not the main focus. There is a company, Buzzsprout. They're one of the podcast hosting companies out there, and they have specialized before in helping churches. I think that's where they actually got their start. So they are familiar with working with nonprofits. But the thing is, a podcast media hosting company is providing a tool. So the question is kind of like going into Lowe's or Home Depot and asking for a hammer that would work best for building a church. No, I don't want a hammer for building a business. I want a hammer for building a church. I mean, do you see the problem here? It's simply a tool. The tool itself is not necessarily intended for one outcome or the other. The tool is intended for you to build that platform, and the platform is what determines the outcome, or the platform is what's relevant to your industry, niche, your approach, anything like that. So Blueberry, Libsyn, Spreaker, Podbean, Buzzsprout, all of these companies are providing tools. And if you don't want to make a commercial podcast, if you're doing a hobby podcast, or if you're doing your podcast for nonprofits or for profits, you're simply using one of these places as a tool. And you can use a tool in many different ways as well. So there's no one podcast host that's better than the other for nonprofits. It's really more about how do you want to work with the tool. Like Blueberry, for example. I recommend Blueberry Media Hosting if you like a WordPress-centered workflow, where everything you do is on WordPress. Blueberry works beautifully with that. It's the best WordPress hosting experience because you create your post on WordPress, you work with your RSS feed on WordPress, you upload your media files through the WordPress interface and it tags them with ID3 tags. You can even see your stats inside of WordPress. Everything can be managed about your account from right there inside of WordPress. So I recommend Blueberry for that. That's without the E's, by the way. If you either don't want to generate your RSS feed with your WordPress site or you don't want to mess with WordPress at all, then I recommend Libsyn. Libsyn can give you a super basic website. They can host your media, also give you stats, but you're using a different content management system. They can create the RSS feed for you, and they work great. They're also pretty good for if you want to have that built-in cross-posting where maybe every time you publish an episode, it automatically publishes to Facebook, or it publishes a fake video on YouTube, which I'm not a fan of, or it publishes to your Tumblr or Blogger post or something like that, or a WordPress.com site. If you like live streaming, then I recommend Spreaker. Or if you want to host multiple shows through a single account, Spreaker is better for that too. You pay based on how much you need to host, not how many shows you have. Like with Blueberry and Libsyn, for every new show that you want to have its separate hosting account, separate stats and everything, you have to pay for an additional show within your account. On Spreaker, you have a single account you pay for, and then you can have many shows within that, but you do have limited storage, so you have to look at what your option is on the Spreaker side of things and what's most affordable for you. If you are looking at some of these other options, these top three are what I recommend the most: Blueberry, Libsyn, Spreaker. There are also Podbean, Buzzsprout. The promo code Noodle should work, I believe, on all of these. Maybe not Buzzsprout, but Noodle will give you a free month with any of them. So it's really about learning how to use the tool. You use the tool to make it support a nonprofit. The tool doesn't have to be designed specifically for nonprofits. I want to jump to the chat room because there have been some responses here. Someone mentioned my sound was cutting out. That might have been a Facebook problem, might have been an OBS problem, but it seems like it's working now anyway. Derek said, hey, I changed the author tags in Libsyn, and now in iTunes, my show fell way down the rankings almost immediately. Does it reset when you do that or change the show rank? Rankings, it really depends on what you're talking about in rankings. So Derek, while I continue, answer in the comments, please. Are you talking about the top podcasts ranking? Are you talking about new and noteworthy? Or are you talking about if you do a search for a relevant term with your podcast? Where exactly is your podcast now ranking lower? While you're answering that, I'll continue with my answer to this. Changing the author tags in Libsyn, and that could be the author tags of either individual episodes or for your overall show. That shouldn't affect your overall show ranking as far as iTunes tracks it with the top podcasts, because the top podcasts section is based on how many new subscribers you have, especially within the last 24 hours. So if you get a lot of new subscribers, you could jump up in that ranking, but then if that big wave of subscribers subsides, and then you drop back down to only maybe 5 new subscribers per day or something like that, then your ranking will appear to drop as well. So the top podcasts is really a matter of ranking who is getting the most new subscribers right now. Not necessarily what's the most popular podcast or what has the most subscribers right now, but it's that more thing of what are people subscribing to. That could change because with Apple's upcoming update to the Apple Podcasts ecosystem, where they will start tracking audience retention for episodes and completion data and such, it would be great if they used that data to also start affecting the iTunes ranking so that you could then see, like they would pull it in to say, okay, it's very similar to how YouTube does this. They would say episodes that are completed or get 90% plus completion rates are probably really good episodes. And the podcasts that have a lot of episodes with 90% plus completion rates are probably really popular. And Apple would be able to track then that popularity based on actual consumption, not merely subscriptions. That's a theory. Maybe they'll change it, maybe they won't. Now, Derek said it's in all podcasts, and he was about 4 rows down, and now he's about 30 rows down. That is probably because of the new subscriptions thing. So the ranking, the top podcast section of iTunes, where you see the top 200 podcasts, that is based on new subscribers. So if you drop down in that, it's not based on anything you did. It just means not as many people are podcasting now. Not as many people are subscribing to your show now as they were earlier. And that's new subscribers. That doesn't mean you lost subscribers. It means that wave of new subscribers is not as big now as it used to be. Your search ranking, so if you search for a relevant term and you drop down in that, or you go up in that, that seems to be based on a couple things. Keyword relevance, keyword density, like how many times you use that particular keyword or phrase, as well as total lifetime subscriptions. So a podcast that has more lifetime subscriptions will probably rank higher than a podcast with fewer lifetime subscriptions. So a new podcast probably won't rank as well in search as an older podcast. But if that newer podcast has more relevant usage of the keywords, then it might rank higher than the older podcast. It's kind of weird. It's a little bit hard to test with some of these things as well. Scott Smith said 99% of book authors on Amazon would love to be interviewed. We've never been turned down. So that's about Philip's question, getting guests for a show. Yeah, find the authors. That's a great place to look. Steve Sleeper said, I had good luck getting guests from radioguestlist.com, but that was a few years back and it seemed to kind of run its course. And that reminds me, radioguestlist.com, a great place to list yourself as an expert or to look for others who want to be interviewed. Also, consider hiring one of these companies, like Jessica Rhodes' company, which is Interview Connections, or Interview Valet. Both of these can help you find guests for your show and help manage the scheduling and everything. Steve Sleeper said, Podbean says they are big on churches and nonprofits. Have you found that to be true? Podbean is still not as much on my radar. They are improving. I'll give them that. But I still can't confidently recommend them due to the way that they run their certain business. Like with offering a free plan, that free is not sustainable for a business. And even for the paid plans, the downloads are kind of slow, slower than Libsyn, Blueberry, and such. So Podbean, although they're getting much better, and they're good for if you want to have crowdfunding tied directly into your podcast creation process and not run a separate Patreon sort of thing. But Podbean, I think, still has a little bit of some ways to go, especially with their stats, jumping on board with the industry standard measurement systems. But I think they are improving. Ed says he uses Libsyn. And one last question here from the chat room before I get back to my list of other questions already submitted. Steve said, do advertisers usually contact you or the other way around? Most of the time, you'll probably need to go to the advertiser unless you have a super popular podcast. You're in the top charts, you've got good famous people talking about you, and you have good guests, you have really good conversations. So it takes a long time to get to that point where advertisers are contacting you. When you get to that point, it's a wonderful place to be because then it means they want you probably more than you want them. And so you can use that in bargaining with them and coming to that agreement. Most of the time, though, you have to go out there and find the advertisers. Unless they're a really, really super smart company that is all excited about advertising on podcasts, then if they're being really smart, then they would go out and find podcasts that reach their ideal audiences and ask about advertising on those podcasts. But still, right now, most companies don't think of that. You might get the occasional company or maybe an independent person who thinks, yeah, I'd lovingly or willingly throw $300 at you to get a mention of my product or service in your podcast. The big thing is make sure you have a page on your site or a section on your site that does explain how a sponsor or how someone can advertise on your podcast. So maybe it would be sponsor this show, or you have an advertising link on your site. So those who are interested know how they can contact you. And from there, you can work on negotiating the exact rate, whether that be a cost per 1,000 downloads kind of thing, or CPM as it's referred to, or if it's a flat rate that you say it's okay, $100 per episode. So you want 4 episodes this month, it'll be $400 this month, and then you sponsor every episode this month. That's something to work out with them and what works best for your situation. Gordon said, referring to episode, I'm not exactly sure what episode it was, but one of my episodes where I talked about ID3 tags, he said, based on your screenshot examples on your blog post, I noticed that you put the episode number in the beginning of the title when you entered it into the ID3 editor. This seems to be the opposite of how they appear on iTunes when they go live. Any reason for this? Well, I've since reversed my suggestion on that. I don't recommend that you put the episode number, especially like the full show name or an episode abbreviation like TAP052 or anything like that at the beginning of your show. Put that at the end of your show. The one thing you could do is if your show is serialized, and it's very important for people to know exactly what episode number they're on and to see the sequence of episode numbers, which for most of us, that's very rare that our shows are like that. Most of us do episodic shows, not serial shows. But if your content is serial and they need to go through it in a particular order, you could consider putting simply the episode number, a period, and then a space, and then the episode title. Don't put the episode show or the show abbreviation like TAP or BTT, DL, or anything like that. Just put simple episode number, not even like with leading zeros or anything like that. But in my next episode of the Audacity podcast, which will publish on June 20th, 2017, I talk about these new changes from Apple coming to the podcast app and the RSS spec. In the new podcasting spec from Apple that will be practical to use later in 2017, they include a new title tag called iTunes :title. And that's a title specifically for podcast apps. And they say, don't put your show name, don't put the episode number, the season number, don't put any of that data inside of the title tag. It should be only the episode title. Then you can have other tags for the season number and the episode number, whether that episode is relative to the whole show. So maybe you're in episode 300, but you happen to be in season 5. That episode number can also be relative to the specific season. So it's episode 3 of season 5. And then there's an episode 3 of season 2 and an episode 3 of season 4 and so on. So those are new abilities we'll have coming soon. The cool thing with that, and I explain this a lot more in the episode that's coming from the Audacity podcast. It's 310, episode 310, if you're interested in checking that out when it publishes on June 20th. But in that, I explain more what's really nice about this and give some explanations or examples of how Apple will be using this. In short, they want a title-only field that then they can display it differently with sometimes the season number, with sometimes the episode number, sometimes without, depending on the context, as well as depending on your actual show format. And it's a really intelligent way of doing it. So we'll have a new episode number field that you'll be able to start using later on. So listen to the Audacity podcast episode 310, which will be at theaudacitypodcast.com/Apple 2017, published on June 20th, if you want to check that out and learn more about that. But now, unless those episode numbers are super important, I really recommend putting them at the end. So back in that episode where I showed to put the episode abbreviation at the beginning, I've changed my mind on that. Put it at the end. Don't take up that space at the beginning. And Ed said, I'm using a Sound Devices 633. I want to output my Behringer Q802 USB mixer, my Skype bumpers, and guests to the Sound Devices 633. Is there an XLR to USB or something like that? Basically, I want to run everything through the USB mixer, then save to the Sound Devices 633. I want to do Skype interviews, insert my segment bumpers, intro, and exits, also add effects via Boss Jock app, and export all to the Sound Devices 633. This is a super specific question, but this can apply to many different mixers and many different kinds of recorders. The basic thing that you want to do, and this is to get a simple stereo recording of your audio, is tap into the mixers. It might be called tape out, or you might need to use main out. Go from the mixer's output to the recorder's input. In this case, with the Behringer Q802, it has stereo quarter-inch balance. I believe they're balanced connections from the mixer. So you would need to go stereo quarter-inch to balanced XLR on the Sound Devices 633. Some mixers might have RCA tape out, and the Q802 does have that. So you could use a splitter that's split RCA to 3.5 millimeter stereo, and that goes into like a line input. That may pick up more interference than the other things. But then what you're doing is you're sending a basic stereo signal from the mixer out to the recorder. This kind of mixer and certain kinds of setups can't support recording every single channel into its own track. To do that, you need to have much more advanced hardware or software if you're doing it through a software interface. But this could work for you the simple way, really. So what I would recommend for the Q802 is get a balanced 1/4 inch to balanced XLR cable. Get 2 of those actually, and you plug one into the left output of the mixer, and then you plug the other into the right output of the mixer, and that would be the main output. And then you connect that to channels 1 and 2 on the sound devices, 633, and on the, what side is it? On the left side are your inputs on the sound devices 633. And so you'd be connecting to channels 1 and 2 on there and setting the gain appropriately on the sound devices. It's very specific, but in general, you could connect any recorder to a mixer in that kind of way, either by adapting it through RCA to 3.5 millimeter, or maybe using XLR cables to go into the recorder. So that way, whatever goes into the mixer will also go out to the recorder and get mixed together and recorded there. Back to the chat room for one more check to see if there's anything else in here. Steve said, great advice on show number, Daniel. First time I've heard someone tell me to do that, to do on that vis-a-vis Apple. That's a term. I forget what it means right now. But I do this live on Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern. I answer podcasting questions at theaudacitypodcast.com/live. I hope you can join me again in the future for some other podcasting questions that I'll answer. And this is an opportunity where I can't always give, or I don't do one-on-one consulting anymore. I can give a quick answer, though, in these Q&As, and I release these videos both on the Facebook page as well as on the YouTube channel. So if you appreciated this information, make sure you subscribe, like, comment, share it, get those notifications, enable those notifications, follow, like, anything like that that you have to do. Anything that's positive, go ahead and do that with this video, and I would really appreciate it. You can also subscribe to my main podcast over at theaudacitypodcast.com, where on Tuesday mornings I publish a new episode of something that helps you to launch or improve your own podcast for sharing your passions and finding success. That's over at theaudacitypodcast.com. And I'm Daniel J. Lewis on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the places as the Daniel J. Lewis. Thank you very much for joining me. Email me your podcasting questions, feedback at theaudacitypodcast.com, and I might be able to answer those in a future podcasting Q&A. Thank you. Have a great day.